I'd like to introduce Peter. Peter grew up in West Germany, a small city close to Frankfurt on Main. He's the youngest of four children, and his family lives in Germany and Norway. After moving to Lethbridge, Alberta in 2001, he worked in technical research and development and a nonprofit organization that supports families with young children. He has two wonderful adulting children who live far away to study. The older daughter, Jay, in Oakville, Ontario, and the younger son, Jasper, in Edmonton, Alberta. In the fall of 2023, he moved to Winnipeg to live with Susan, his partner of more than 11 years. He is excited about any opportunity to be outside and explore nature, hiking, cross-country skiing, paddling. Winnipeg has been really good to him. He's particularly impressed by the ability of Winnipeg drivers to avoid cars parked on major throughways. So please welcome Peter Imhof.
Well, thank you for the introduction here. And yeah, it's so really good to be here and to talk about, have the opportunity to talk about my work. I've done, various presentations about my work in the past, but this is the first time I actually get to speak about my work as a data analyst, which is something that I've started in the fall of 2021, so not too long ago. So it was a good opportunity for me to sort of look back and think about that and try to frame it. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. So let's see if we can work out this tech thing. And I will try and share my screen with you. And if you can let me know whether you see a presentation. I get some thumbs up here. That's great. Let me see if I can make it a little bigger. No. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So my name is Peter Imhof, and yeah, I'm gonna just share a little bit about what I'm doing at work, but not quite. I want to sort of frame it as that is the role that I think data analysis can have in our community, and especially in our efforts to build a stronger community, whatever that may mean. So I'll do a bit of an introduction, and then my case in point will be the opioid crisis in Canada. There's a lot of data involved in it. Important topic that's hitting a lot of different places in Canada. And I'll talk a little bit about non-financial data, and then at the end, some time for questions. So yeah, please keep that in mind. I'm looking forward to conversation, your questions, suggestions, ideas, criticism. That's all good. I'm curious what you have to say on this. So here is a picture of a young data analyst named Peter Imhof, and that's me showing off my science fair project when I was 15. And I did a math project on sort of a geometry topic, and yeah, I've always been a nerd. That is sort of the simple way to interpret that picture. And I've worked since October 2021 with two different First Nations police services, one after the other, one in Alberta and now in Manitoba. As a data analyst. I've also done a couple of other things, but that's what I really mainly want to talk about today. Just very briefly on the Manitoba First Nations Police Service. It's an independent Indigenous police service in Manitoba that was previously known as the Dakota Ojibwe Police Service. Maybe that speaks to some folks. But now they have 8 different detachments in the community, 8 different First Nations. All the way up in the north, that is Opaskwayak, adjacent to the PA. as far south as Roseau River, down the Red River Valley, and I guess as far west as Chanupa Wakpa. And yeah, so different communities, some of them under the Dakota Ojibwe Tribal Council and others not. My role here is right now, I'm really focusing on the strategic piece, strategic data analysis to make decisions, like evidence-based decision making is really what it comes down to. And that is sort of what my current role focuses on. In corporate settings, it's called business intelligence, whatever you want to call it. There's also a second piece that will probably become more relevant in the future, and that's more tactical criminal or crime analysis. So that's really when you're chasing very specific situations and you're making use of public data or not so public data to identify where the person of interest could be found and what that person is up to. So I want to talk about the opioid crisis, and many of you will have heard that term. And it's something that has shown up in Canada since about 2016, really, with a lot of sort of a resurgence, I guess. Opioids with heroin and related items have been a thing for many decades, but more recently, fentanyl has rewritten the chapter on opioids, and it has become a very impactful illicit and non-illicit presence in the substance use in many substance use stories. So all the way to the point where, you know, Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix, they died of an heroin overdose, and that's part of their story in the 70s. And in the mid-teens, Tom Petty and Prince died of a fentanyl overdose, where that has become so widespread that it's also hitting the famous individuals. It's fentanyl is a synthetic drug, synthetic opioid, very powerful, and readily available on the street as an illicit drug. And on the right-hand side here is my first data slide. You see the number of accidental apparent opioid toxicity deaths in the awkward language of Stats Canada or Health Canada between 2016 and 2023. So you can really see this chart becoming, those bars becoming bigger, and not just a little bit. And just want to mention that the last bar here for 2023 is only for 3 quarters. So it's not like the problem is going down right now. I want to hark back before I spend more time on the opioids on another public health issue that we have seen and dealt with, and that is COVID-19. And the stories, you know, the tall tales during the pandemic, you know, are remarkable. Nobody in living memory has experienced something like that. But we've also seen it coming back. Right? There was a lot of talk about rebuilding better, a lot of talk about reaching back to pre-pandemic levels. And in many cases, we see it. So here is the unemployment rate for Canada from Indeed. And I think they sourced it from the Canadian government. And it was really a shock to the system, right? Like the unemployment spiked very significantly, very substantially. But then it has also come back again. And in some areas, we see those kinds of graphs. We see a spike in March, April 2020, and then a slow, more or less slow recovery over time. And I guess, you know, when I think about resilience, that is the definition of resilience. We can deal with a shock and come back to where we were previously. So, you know, I think that this is an argument that our economic system, our economy, is a resilient system and can bounce back. And I'll come back to that point in a second. The opioids that we see today, so these are data from 2023, are from specific parts of Canada mostly. They're not evenly distributed. And the most severely hit provinces are British Columbia, Alberta, and Ontario. And you can see this here by just the sheer numbers. The per capita rate, it just brings that back a little bit and, puts Saskatchewan in a different place here. But the absolute numbers are really these three provinces. And there's also here a little note I want to make right away, that Manitoba on this chart is supposed to be the fourth bar from the left, but there are no data available. So there's a little NA not applicable for Manitoba data on opioids. So as any public health crisis, there are some key elements that people do when public health crisis hit. And with that, I mean the opioid crisis. There's prevention, there's treatment, there's harm reduction, and enforcement have been identified specifically in various configurations and maybe wordings as common treatment pillars. And different communities decide to emphasize different pillars. And I want to speak a little bit about Alberta and BC. In my mind, there's a sort of a natural social experiment that these two provinces are currently running. I'm sure there will be a paper at some point that compares those two approaches and the outcomes. I hope there will be. And everybody who knows a little bit about Canadian politics and BC and Alberta politics in specific isn't surprised that the approaches are very different in those two provinces. So British Columbia is really big on the harm reduction. They added more supervised consumption sites. They decriminalized possession of small amounts of hard drugs. They are offering a safe supply. And Alberta does that differently. And they have reduced the capacity of supervised consumption sites and emphasized treatment and provide more opportunities and more directly available avenues for individuals to seek treatment. So they have sort of looked at all those pillars, and they're all doing all of them in some way or another. Nobody stops law enforcement. It's just done differently. But clearly the emphasis lies differently. And so just to depoliticize my presentation here, I'm not trying to convince you that one is better than the other. That's not at all what this talk is about. I just want to sort of highlight that we have the opportunity to really study. When we emphasize two different things, we're taking two different paths to address the same kind of problem. Here's an opportunity maybe for learning and see what we can find. So let's look at British Columbia first. I don't expect you to read this thing on the left-hand side. This is a screenshot from their website, and it just highlights that, the different measures that they put front and center in terms of the opioid response. And on the right-hand side, the graph, you can see this is now the rate per person. So how many deaths per person, 100,000 people, individuals, warm beating hearts, are how many people out of 100,000, what the rate of death is due to opioid toxicity in British Columbia. Data is there from 2016 to 23. And the first take-home message that I really want to, the first take-home message for you that I want to really emphasize is that the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, really was a double whammy for the opioid crisis, where in the year of 2020, and really more specifically when you drill into it, as of March, April, May 2020, right after the prevention measures regarding COVID kicked in, the opioid deaths just increased dramatically. And The other piece that I want to highlight to you is, remember that unemployment chart that went up high when the pandemic hit, and then it came down, and now we're at close to pre-pandemic or around pre-pandemic levels. That is not happening with our opioid-related deaths. They kicked up, they increased substantially when the COVID pandemic hit, but they've never come back, and they remain high. Especially here, you can see it for British Columbia, but Alberta is just no different. They remain high. And I think what we're learning now is that we are having a situation that doesn't speak of resilience, it speaks of vulnerability. And it makes sense when you think about the people who die of illicit opioid use. It is people who are vulnerable. They have mental health issues, they are homeless, they live in poverty. And so here is sort of a graphical representation of what a vulnerable system looks like when you put it under stress. Again, on the left-hand side of this slide, just a screenshot really from the main opioid response page from Alberta. And, I want to really highlight that, in Alberta, when you go there, the top 2 points that they have there is stop overdoses and get naloxone, right? So we're talking about harm reduction, even on Alberta's homepage. So for Manitoba, again, a screenshot from the government website, plus the data that are available for Manitoba, you again see that rise in 2020, very substantial in terms of what it was pre-pandemic, pre-COVID pandemic in Manitoba and what it became then. But I also want to highlight that the 2022 data are incomplete. And Manitoba did not make data available as of April 2022. That chart is from Health Canada website, which pulls all the data from the different provinces together. So public knowledge, right? This is not from my work at all. As of 2023, there is no data available at all. And that is one thing that really surprised me when I came here, where as a key element of the opioid response in Canada and in many of its provinces was a data strategy to build awareness and to build an understanding of where we're at and how the measures that we are taking are working out. And to not have public data available for Manitoba seems to me, as a data analyst, that is my professional bias and oversight, and puts us in a weaker position when it comes to addressing the opioid response. And what I see from other data sources, Manitoba public data that's available here in Winnipeg, opioids are definitely opioids are becoming more relevant on the streets here. But I don't think they have quite reached the level yet of the provinces like Alberta, BC, and Ontario. But if that were to happen, or if and when that happens, it will certainly change the conversation here and change the experience here in Manitoba. And I'm hoping that the government now starts to look into this and prepare to see that we can effectively respond to that if and when that were to happen. So now I want to pivot away from the opioids and talk a little bit more about data and I guess the two types of data that I would argue there are. On the one side, you have financial data. So a lot of people, when they hear data, they think accounting. And, you know, there's a whole venerable profession to be had there. And what I want to highlight is the contrast to that, the non-financial data. I think the corporate sector doesn't realize how lucky they are that they have an easy or many easy measures that just come part of how they do their everyday work, how they function, how they run. That everything runs with money. People get paid in money, products and services get sold in money. And at the end of the day, you can look at your balance sheet and you can see whether you've made some money or not, whether you had revenue, what your stock value is right now. So various derived metrics. They're not trivial, and it's good that we have smart people who figure out the accounting. But money really is an excellent metric because everybody counts it. And at the end, you can make decisions based on that. Was the iPhone 12 successful or not? Well, you can find out by looking at various metrics that are typically related to dollar signs. Now, in the public sector and in the nonprofit sector, that changes, right? We still, in the public sector and the nonprofit sector, you still have to pay your people in money because they have to eat and drink and join Rotary clubs and all that stuff. But you don't know whether the product or the service you provide is meeting the needs of your customer, of your client, of your community, because you're not selling it. Right? We're not paying for policing service. We're not necessarily paying a true value for, let's say, a library or for the services provided by a homelessness support organization. That's not how they function, and they cannot function like that. And so nonprofits and public sector organizations have to find other ways to identify, to make their decisions, to identify whether a certain project, whether a certain initiative, whether a certain program is successful or not, whether the direction they're going into, whether their strategic direction whether they're making progress towards their strategic goals. And so that is really where I personally see a great opportunity, a great, in a sense, gap for the public and nonprofit sector, where that is not always fully realized by those organizations. That the question of how to make decisions should be based on evidence. You have only so many resources. You only get so much money from the government. Are you using it wisely? Are you using it effectively to the people who expect that service or expect those products from you? And are you doing it in an efficient way? As previously working in the nonprofit sector, that was really a key driver for me to spend some time on data, even when I was working in that area. And just as an example for this kind of conversation is I pulled something from earlier relevant here in Winnipeg. I think that's an article from March 2024 about that community center, community space that is in the Millennium Library that was introduced a few years ago, and where the city has now said, oh, we don't have funding for this. And well, there's another conversation about jurisdiction happening here, but be that as it may, they said, okay, we can't fund this anymore, and we're going to cut it. And then, CBC does interviews with the people who run this organization or who advocate for the services. And then, the quotes come back. The article mentions things like, the heartwarming, the heartfelt impact, right, that the workers have, that the people have who work in those support organizations, because that's what they do. They are social workers, and It's important. That work is important to them. So they speak in very emotional terms often. And they speak of here an incredibly innovative and nationally celebrated program. And that's all great and wonderful. And I have no personal opinion on whether this specific program should be continued or not. But I would hope that we can understand as nonprofits, that we can understand as public organizations, that we need to substantiate our organization, our decisions, and we need to understand that things like innovation carries risk with it. Yes, we want to be innovative. We need to be innovative in order to meet the demand better. But sometimes we need to realize we tried something and we failed. And that's a good insight. And let's do something different. And we can only understand whether it failed or not. That's what I would argue. If we put some disoriented data around it, because the people who are doing it, who work hard, who are engaged and are passionate about it, they will always say, yes, this is worthwhile, as they should, as they need to, because that's their job. But that's why I think that data analysis is particularly important in the nonprofit and public sector. And I look forward to any questions you might have. And thanks for listening to me.
Peter, just a comment about Manitoba. Can you